If you're fishing cover and not sure where bass are sitting, a jig tells you fast and gets big bites doing it. Bass live around grass, docks, wood, and rock. If you're around cover, you're around fish. But figuring out how they're using it, that's the key. This is why the jig is one of my simple 7. Today I'm breaking down jigs and how you can use them to unlock a lake fast. So in this video, I'll cover why I use jigs, where I throw them, when I throw them, what jigs and trailers I throw, and then how I throw them. If you stick around to the end, I'll throw in a few bonus tips of when to stop using them and when to switch to something different, and also the common mistakes a lot of people have with jigs. So the why on a jig, why it's part of my simple 7, and it's one of the goats of bass fishing. It's one of the lures we all use. But the thing is why I use a jig, and it's part of one of my simple assortments, both to find fish and to catch them, it's so versatile. Bass always get around cover. You know that they're around grass, if there's wood in the water, if there's rocks, if there's boat docks, you know there's fish around it. The question always is, are those fish kind of chasing a spinnerbait, a crankbait, a bladed jig? Can I wind past them and they'll come out and get it? Or do I have to pitch in there, let it go to the bottom, and more kind of slow fish it or drag them to catch them? Now, the neat thing about a jig, I can do both of those. I can use it as a drop bait, I can put it into cover, and I can also swim it. So I can figure out pretty quickly which way the fish are wanting to eat that day. And on a lot of casts, I can fish both because some days, some want it on the drop, some want it spinning. This one lure gives you 2 retrieves in one cast. And the other thing about a jig, I can fish it shallow or deep or for suspended fish in the middle of the water column. I don't care if bass are in a foot of water or in the summertime out in 30 feet of water. I can just change out my trailer and my head a little bit and I can fish it anywhere in the water column, keep it on top, get it down deep or anywhere in between. So where do I fish a jig? Well, you can already guess it. I think from the first part, it's the fact that I'm looking for cover in the water. Again, that's boat docks, that can be bushes, that can be brush piles, laydowns, lily pads, flooded grass, matted grass, rocks, anything like that. Now, cover to me is kind of how you find fish anyway. If it's a new lake, the first thing I'm going to do is run up and down the lake until I find some cover, and we're going to try it. I'm hopefully going to try it, find different types of cover. So docks in one cove, another has grass, maybe a rocky bank in another section. If it's my home lake and I'm trying to figure out what the fish are doing on that particular day, well, it's the same thing. I'm looking for cover. So to me, the cover and the jig go hand in hand. This fish is covered well. Cover is where I start looking for fish. All right, so let's dive into some of the details of the jig, the actual what jig, what trailers, all that good stuff. So to me, there's 2 main categories of jigs. The one I have here, this is the traditional flipping jig. It's a heavy cover or a casting jig. Has a pretty broad head that comes through cover really well, through brush and grass and stuff. A heavy-duty weed guard, has a skirt on it, does not come with a trailer. You have to pick the trailer, but this is made to be placed into thick cover, come through without snagging up. Now, the other type of jig is a swim jig, and this has more of a cone-shaped head. This is made specifically for coming through grass. Doesn't do great in brush. Light brush is fine, but more for grass. So eelgrass, hydrilla, milfoil, all that type stuff. Has a thinner weed guard because you want good hookups, a little bit lighter wire hook. You're not trying to put it into brush, so you don't need to protect it as much. But the hookup ratio with that thinner weed guard and then that lighter wire hook, you can hook up a little bit better. And the main thing, though, is that head is more of a cone shape. It's designed specifically to come through the grass, sneak through there. It's more weedless, truly weedless when we're talking about weeds. Now, the main attributes of a jig, like I said, it's the head. And then it's also the hook. The stouter the wire, if you're using big lines, say 20, 25-pound fluorocarbon or a braided line and stuff, when you set the hook hard, you want a really stiff hook that won't bend out, it won't flex. A heavy-duty weed guard comes through cover better. The problem is, the thicker the weed guard, the heavier duty the wire. If you're making casts with it at a long distance and a little pull, you're not getting the hook in there. So the farther you throw it away from the boat and the lighter line, you want a thinner hook and a thinner weed guard. The closer the range, the heavy-duty one. And then the other main thing with jigs, outside of the skirt color, obviously, but the head size, you see how much weight. And typically, most of them start about 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2 are really standard, and then you can get up to 3/4 and bigger jigs as well. Now, the standard size for swim jigs is typically like a 3/8 ounce. You go 1/4 if you want something light, 1/2 if you want something really deep, but 3/8 is what most guys are using. Flippin' jigs, people go with ½ ounce is probably the most common, 3/8 if you want a little bit slower fall, and then the 5/8, 3/4, 1 ounce, that's more specialized when you're really getting into heavy grass or you're fishing really deep. Now remember, the whole point of this video and this series is to simplify your tackle. So what I do most of the time is I go with a 3/8 ounce jig. That's the light side of the flippin' jig. It's the standard size of a swim jig. It's a great all-around one. I can make it work most of the time. 75–80% of the time, it's all I need. I don't deviate from it. When I get into specialty conditions, that's when I'll change up. But I pretty much start with a 3/8, and unless things are really getting wonky, it's super windy, super deep, super thick or something, I just stick with 3/8 and call it good. Now, when do I deviate with it? That 20% of the time. With a swim jig, I'm most likely to change it up. This is 3/8. I'll go to a 1/4 if it's really thick grass where it's starting to mat on the top, getting really thick, and the 3/8 is going to want to bog down a little bit. The 1/4 is going to crawl over it. So in that case, you don't want penetration. You don't want to be getting into the cover. You want to almost be like a topwater and skim across and then fall into the holes. I'll go to a 1/4 ounce when it's real thick grass. Now, when it's really windy and I'm starting to fish deep, and I'm talking like 7–8 feet down to 20, something like that, in the summer or winter, that's when I go heavier, the half up to 1 ounce. But that's changing up. That's more special kind of seasons and less of this traditional jig fishing that I'm talking about. And then to make it even more streamlined, I'll tell you what my favorite jig lately, instead of the swim jig or the flippin' jig, what I've done is Berkley has a skipping jig. It's made for dock fishing, so it's a little bit lighter weed guard, it's a little bit lighter hook, and it has a really wide head that's flat, so it comes through grass really well, and it skims up over grass great, so I can get away with 3/8. A lot of times in that thicker stuff, and it also skips back into cover really well. So I can pitch and skip back into the wood where I'm trying to get there under overhanging branches and stuff. So this has really become my workhorse. It's halfway between a swimming jig and a flipping jig. That skipping jig's kind of a medium one. It has enough of a shoulder to come through brush, but it comes through grass well enough. The skipping jig's what I use most of the time. That way I can just have one jig, change the color a little bit, but I'm pretty much at that 3/8 there. I feel like I'm good for most anything. Now, it's really easy to get into the weeds on these. People are going to talk about trimming the weed guard and how you do it, and they cut out some strands. They cut it at an angle and stuff. Man, I don't know. I don't even worry about that. Typically, the jig skirt length, they're not cut. With a flipping jig, if I'm around more cover, when I'm trying to throw it into cover, I'll leave that longer. I don't really care. If I'm going to a swim jig and I'm really trying to swim it most of the time and I'm not even dropping it and stuff, I will trim it a little bit shorter to the length of the hook, or if there's short striking, I will shorten it up there. Or if I'm really small trailer, I'll just cut it to the length of the hook. But all that trimming the skirt, trimming the weed guard and stuff, it makes great content for videos and tips and all that stuff. I don't think it makes a huge difference. They either want a jig or they don't. I just try to go to 3/8, go to that skipping jig, call it good. So the when of a jig, it works most any time, because anytime they're around cover, which is kind of year round, there's always fish around cover, it'll work. But these are the peak times when I think it's really good. And then how you fish it changes a lot from day to day. So peak season number one for both numbers and size, anytime in the spring, and we're talking early spring, up north, your natural lakes, this is right after ice out. On the southern lakes, you're talking January, February, pre-spawn. Anyway, into the spawn and then through the post-spawn. Now, pre-spawn, they're getting in grass and brush and everything, just any piece of shallow cover, boat docks and stuff, they're getting ready to spawn. So that's the cover. The bass are really relating to it, and especially the females. And then post-spawn, the bluegills start spawning. You get the shad spawn. Bass are just up there shallow still feeding. Again, they're around cover, especially early and late. You can just smash them on the shad spawn and just feeding in those low light conditions. The whole spring's really good for a jig. Fall's another traditional period that's pretty good, a little bit better for numbers and less for size, but fish get shallow a lot of times in the backs of creeks. You find them around shad, really relating on shad again. So a jig works well then, especially that swim jig style. Now with the when and where it changes the most, and we'll get into this with the how, but the brighter it is, the tighter they're going to be to cover. So that's where I'm getting more of that flipping style style jig and I'm putting it into cover. And when it's more overcast, that's when they're going to roam more. That's where more of a swim works better. And a lot of times you find them near the cover, but not in it. All right, so let's get into the how specifically. And you have several different ways to work a jib. Basically, you can swim it, you can drop it, and then you can also drag it or hop it along the bottom. So let's get into the swim one first. And remember, once again, these retrieves, a lot of times I do multiple ones on every cast. So I'll swim it some and flip it or drag on each individual cast. So I'm showing a multiple, but let me go through the individual styles and how you can do it on an entire cast. And then at the end, we'll work on comboing these together so you do more than one thing on one cast. So this is more the swim jig style setup here. Swimming a jig, I like to do it 3 different ways. And the first one is probably my favorite. I'll throw it out there and then there's grass and I'm going to hold my rod tip high at say about a 10 to 11 o'clock angle. And then I'm going to reel this thing just slowly with my rod tip up. And if there's clumps of grass or something, I'm trying to get around cover or any sort of shallow cover there, even like a little lay down tree or something. I want this jig to come through that cover and crawl over the top of it and just tick the top of it, not bury down in it, but be touching the top of it the whole time. So I'm holding a rod tip high and sometimes I'll lift it up to bring it up and over that cover, but I'm just going to retrieve this up and over that cover. It's not a top water. It's not on the surface unless the grass to the surface. It'll crawl over a pad or a little weed clump, but you're just feathering it over the top of the grass. Now, the second option is sometimes you want to plow it through, and this is in the middle of the spawn. When they are spawning, their beds, those fish, if it's more than about 1.5 feet of water, they're not going to come up for a bait. They're going to need something that comes right through the bed. In that case, instead of my rod tip being up, I'm going to hold it down more at like an 8 o'clock, something like that, 7 o'clock, pointing it down at the water. And then it's just a slow retrieve where I'm plowing it through the grass or any cover and rocks and stuff. I'm just crawling it up and over that cover pretty close to the bottom. I'm plowing that one. So the first one, when you have it high, you're feathering it over the cover. The second one, rod tip down, you're plowing it right through. Now, the third variation is called the Southern Swim Jig or like the Alabama Shake. That's a little bit different. I'm going to hold my rod tip again about 10, 11 o'clock. And as I'm reeling it, I'm just going to be popping this rod the entire time. I'm just shaking a little bit and you have a little bit of slack in your line. So you're kind of reeling behind. So there's a tiny bit of slack, but I'm shaking it. And as your jig's coming through, instead of just a steady swim like you have on the feather or the plow, this thing's it's just shaking and hopping. And I typically do that more with not a swimming trailer, but just like a beaver style one or something. And these appendages are just going to be shaking the whole time, almost like a bladed jig, like a chatterbait or slobber knocker. You're making it just kind of bop and shake there. So it's quivering and it's not going forward as fast. You're kind of just pop, 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 pop. I mean, it's about 2 times a second. You're pop, 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 pop like that. And it's that whole time it's just shaking. It's just kind of coming forward. It's not steadily swimming, but it's just kind of pulsating. And the jig, the skirt and the trailer and stuff are just kind of, it's almost like a squid or something just popping out, making it pop 2 times a second. So you're kind of shaking it in place. So it's moving around a lot. It's kind of spastic, but it's not really moving forward. You're not streaking it. It's just kind of feathering in front of them. A lot of times that draws them out of the cover when they're kind of buried down in cover and something's swimming over their heads a little too fast. When you're popping it like that, it's just kind of lingering over the top of them and they'll come up and smash it. So your traditional jig fishing, that's the flipping and pitching. You can cast and do this. Mostly it's a roll cast, a skip cast, a pitch or a flip. The main thing on this, it's going to penetrate the cover, get down in there if it's a slack line. So if you put slack in your line, the bait's going to fall straight down. If you have tension on your line, it's going to be pulling it and it's got a pendulum. So if this is the brush pile right here, if I have it on slack line, it's going to drop right down into the heart of that cover where I want it. If I have tension on my line, it's going to be hidden and it's going to come away from it. It's going to swim away from it. So that's the only key on flipping it, putting it into cover. I want to feed it slack and I want to check if those fish are down in the base of a bush, if there's a grass plant, pad, something like that, a brush pile. I want to put it down in the heart and see if that fish is down in the middle of it. So I just pitch it in there with slack and then you can yo-yo it. It's a matter of sometimes you lift drop once or twice. Sometimes when they're really aggressive, it goes to the bottom once, you pick up, reel out, go to another one, and sometimes you have to leave it in there and shake it. That's all part of the varying the retrieve. But the main thing is we're putting it into the heart of the cover, checking if he's in there, and then putting it in the next target, drop it into the next one. And then the other variation, if you have rocks or if you're out deep or there's gaps in between, like say there's holes in the grass, or if there's timber or something or between two brush piles or next to a drop or something, you can drag a jig where that's simply you put it on the bottom and you're just with your rod tip low, you're just pulling that forward. I'm not picking the thing up. I'm just with my rod tip pointed down towards the water, I'm just dragging forward. And maybe you want to drag it a few inches if it's cold. If it's warm, I might want to pull it forward like 3 feet or something at a time, but you're just dragging on the bottom. The other way is the old, kind of like a Texas rig. You're just going to lift your rod tip. You're going to pick up your slack. Your line's going to be right at, about 9 o'clock, flap there. And I'm just going to lift up to about 11 o'clock, not whipping it, but just kind of slow raising it. And that makes the jig just swim up off the bottom a little bit, a foot or two. And the faster I raise it, the higher it goes up. So I can raise it up slow, and then he kind of swims down. It gets their attention. They see it come up, and then it just slowly comes back down. So like I said, I'm going with the Simple 7. I'm trying to get one bait that allows me to do all this stuff. So what I'm typically doing, say there's a flooded bush or there's a clump of grass or something like that, what I like to do is pitch my bait or skip it. I can roll cast and skip it from a long ways, so that lets me cover more water, whereas a pitch, I have to get kind of right up on it. And I'll do that later if they're really around the bushes and stuff or the docks. But I like to skip a long cast out there, let it go to the bottom next to the piece of cover. So I get as close to a dock post as I can, as close to a bush as I can, as close to the grass clump or something, let it go to the bottom. That's your traditional, if he's on the bottom, he's going to hit it. Lift up, feel if he's there. If not, then I'm going to swim it back. Here's the other thing. Now, if there's another stump or another grass clump or something, we can repeat the whole process. Instead of having to make another cast, I swim it up to the next one. So I feather it on the top, or I Alabama shake it, or I just plow through. I get to the next one, feed it slack again, let it fall to the bottom. So now I'm getting a second drop. And sometimes you'll have like 3 grass clumps or 3 stumps in a row, or dock posts. I can throw it to the back dock post. I can let it drop, swim up to the next one, let it drop again, swim up to the next one, drop it again. So you're getting multiple drops and multiple swims on the same retrieve. Now here's a basic rule of thumb you can use. The muddier the water is, the sunnier that it is, and the colder the water is, the tighter they're typically going to be to cover, and the slower, less aggressive movements that I'm going to want to use. So the flip side of that, obviously, if the water's clearer, if it's more overcast or rainy, and if the water's warmer, I'm going to move my bait quicker. I'm also going to check if they're outside the cover, if they're swimming around it, they're kind of relating to the dock, but they're 3 or 4 feet off to the side. Same with bushes and pads and stuff. I'm going to work it more aggressively and check in between the cover and around it versus putting it necessarily right in the middle of it. But the main thing with this retrieve is you need to experiment. You're going to figure out some days, a lot of days, I catch 30% of my fish on that initial drop next to the cover, and about 70% are when I'm swimming it back in. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's like, well, about 60, 70% are on the initial drop, and every once in a while I'll get one, maybe about 30% of them on the swim back in. Some days it's 100%. Those ones, it's like every fish I caught, it was that initial drop. I haven't gotten a single bite swimming it back, or I never got one on the initial drop. They're all swimming it, halfway back, 5 feet away from the piece of cover. So basically, I experiment with those different retrieves, the feather, the plow, the Alabama shake, the letting it drop, dragging it on the bottom. I keep on mixing up my retrieves, and a lot of times to the same piece of cover. Say there's a brush pile or a lay down tree or something like that. My first one, I might let it go to the bottom and then feather it over the top and try to swim it high. Next time, I might let it go to the bottom and then more plow it through or crawl through the bottom. Or I may do the Alabama shake, and I may come from different angles and stuff. The main thing what you're trying to do is decide, are these fish, are they tucked right into the middle of the cover? Are they pretty much out on the very ends of it? They're near it, but not in it. If you throw in it, all you're doing is getting snagged because they're all 5 feet out in front. Are they all in the swim? Are they all in the drop? Do you have to let it sit in the bottom? Is it a combination of each? That's giving you information. And I don't just change up based on the first time, but you start getting 3, 4, or 5 bites in a row where it's like, dude, every time it's that initial drop, the whole rest of the retrieve is wasted. If I got 5 in a row that are on the initial drop, I'm not swimming them anymore. I'm getting up closer. I'm just going to start dropping. Conversely, if none are on that drop and they're all out in front, well, I'm going to turn up the trolling motor. I'm going to boom it out there. I'm going to land it up in that cover, but I'm going to swim it out, and I'm going to go with more of a swim and retrieve. I'm never going to let it hit the bottom. So let the fish tell you what they want. Now, if all of a sudden it was raining all morning and the sun comes out and now all of a sudden the wind lays down, it gets sunny and slick, stuff changes like that, or you get to a different part of the lake, it's like, man, it was really clear, but I came around the corner in the back of the creek, it's all muddy. You might need to change up again, keep experimenting. But when conditions stay the same and everything looks kind of the same, you're in the same part of the lake, that's when you build that pattern. You can really expand. Once you have it unlocked, run around and find similar stuff. Use that intel. Don't keep experimenting, dial it in a little bit more. So going back to my jig, remember I said I like the skipping jig is kind of the one that's the jack of all trades. It's a little bit of both. Now, if I'm catching every fish, they're in flooded bushes and stuff, I'm putting in the heavy cover, it's always on that drop, I have to get it into the heart of the cover, well, I'm probably going to switch then to go to a flipping jig. It has a better weed guard, it's going to hang less, I can get it back in there better. On the flip side, you know, if they're all swimming, they're all around that grass out in front or something, that's when I'll switch up and I'll go to that swim jig then. It's a little bit more designed for it. That's where I get more specialized. But up until that point, I need them to really convince me that this is the deal today before I'm going to get specialized and start changing up my bait. And the neat thing about this system is it allows you to still experiment. You know, the worst thing is we get a few bites, you get locked into something, it's working a bit, but in the back of your mind, you're always wondering like, well, man, I wonder if flipping was better, or if I, you know, throwing a spinnerbait through these trees might be better or something. The neat thing about the jig is if I get on a flipping bite and I'm flipping into the tree all the time, well, I can still check it. I can still randomly swim it in a few times and check, hey, maybe they started chasing on the swim now. I can check that just with a few casts. I don't have to pick up another rod. I don't have to re-rig. I can keep on checking and experimenting during the day, again, with just one lure. So in terms of setup here, it's pretty simple. Again, I want a jack of all trades. So most of the time, I'm going with a kind of a swim jig setup. This is 7.2 medium heavy power. So it has enough tip. I can fling that 3/8 and even the quarter. I can fling it out there if I want to. But then medium heavy has enough backbone and stuff to drive it home if I need to. And then I'll go to a fast reel. This is an 8-to-1. It's the Revo STX. There's a lot of dead water. You're not having to winch. You don't fight fish in with the reel. You're fighting them in more with your rod. So basically, I want that high speed. So when I'm in the target zone, I'm swimming it through the tree or an area, I can slow reel it through there. But as soon as I hit that dead water, I can burn it back in, cast it out again. Now, my mainstay is 15-pound fluorocarbon. I think this is plenty heavy. I flip with this sometimes. Lines has gotten so much better. I feel pretty good about 15-pound, even in grass and stuff. That's what I use most of the time. Now, if I get it dialed in, they're really in super thick vegetation, like pad stems and stuff, really thick matted grass. I will go to braid then. If it's flooded bushes and those fish are coming up on this, like a southern swim jig style like that, I'll go to braid again sometimes, use 30 to 50-pound braid because they're not line shy, and that helps me get a few more out. But most time, the 15-pound fluorocarbon is fine on this setup. Now, if they're more in the wood, it's really a wood or dock, pattern where I'm more flipping. I'm not swimming it very much. That's when I go to a 7.5. That's more for pitching. I like pitching that. The 7.2, I can roll cast that more, a little more accurately, skip it up underneath docks and overhanging bushes, all that type stuff. The 7.5, your more traditional flipping stick. I'll go to a medium heavy, up to a heavy on this if I'm using, the half and bigger. And extra fast, I want a real quick tip with this. And then I go with the rocket. This is 10-to-1 because when I'm flipping, there's tons of dead water. I'm typically putting it right into the heart of the cover. I'm going to yo-yo it or drag it a couple times, and then I'm going to burn it in, make the next cast. Every time that I'm reeling, I'm just wasting time. I go to 10-to-1 on this. Now, everybody wants to know about the trailers, and they're definitely important as well, not only because they change the look of it and the bulk of it, but they really change the way that it swims and the way it falls. So part of this is driven by the way I'm fishing it, and if I'm in open water or more flipping, and also the time of the year. If they're really keyed in on shad, I think that's a big deal, like shad spawn. If in the fall there's shad all around, that's what they're really keying on. That makes it pretty easy. I'm typically going with, like, this is the drip swimmer. I'm going with the shad, some sort of a boot tail, or like an action tail. This is the deal, but kind of a grub tail. Looks like a swimming shad a little bit more. I'm going more with that shad type profile then. The good thing is bass aren't too choosy, and most of the time they're eating shad and minnows, and they'll eat bluegill and crawdads. They'll eat any of it, and you just need something that kind of looks like something they would eat versus match the hatch exactly. So I like my most versatile one. This is a creature hog. It's just a creature bait, and you see here, or a kind of a beaver style. It doesn't have action tails. This is great for flipping. It has a flat side, so I can skip it really well. To me, putting it in the cover, getting it in the key spot is as important as about anything. So getting it in there, I can skip it in there pretty quietly. I can shake this and give it action, or I'll get that Alabama shake if I want to give it action, but it's also really subtle if they're not turned up, and that falls pretty true as well. There's not a lot of resistance, so I can drop this down pretty fast and put it right into the target. So that's a great all-around starting type one for me. I feel pretty confident when I'm flipping around with the creature hog on the back. And then craws, I use two different ones. This is the Krug craw, and I also use the stank bug as well. They accomplish a couple different things for me. One, I like the fact that those appendages there, they're going to slow down the fall. So when it goes in there, they create more drag when they come down. A lot of times a slow fall, especially in muddier water, colder water, that slow fall is going to make fish that are more reluctant, make them bite. And the other thing is it keels the bait. So when I'm swimming it or make it go on the bottom, when I have those two appendages, it falls evenly. The bait's going to fall and typically come to a rest where it's going to be standing up. It's not going to be rolled over on its side. So it's going to want to try to snag less, but two, it's going to look more natural when it comes down to the bottom. Whereas the swimming style ones, the minnows and stuff, they're typically going to fall, and when it hits the bottom, they're going to want to roll over on their side, which just, I don't know, maybe looks like a dead fish, but to me, that's not as appealing. It leaves you more open to snags, because it'll roll over a little bit. But the main thing is when it's going to the bottom, I typically like a twin tail, whether it's like this style that's flat on the bottom, that creature hog, or the craws, that it's just going to keep it so it's laying more natural versus just laying like a weirdo fish that's just he's just been concussed or something, passed out on his side on the bottom. All right, so the next question is always color, right? You can see obviously the greens and stuff. These ones I had rigged. I just pulled out of the tackle box. It's kind of a green. It's got a little shad and bluegill, white and purple mixed in there. And the greens, it's hard to go wrong, even in muddy water or whatever. That's a great all around one. When it gets muddier, I like black blue a little more. And also in the mud, or if they're on shad, if I'm swimming it, white is a hammer. That shad spawn in the fall and stuff, white's awfully good. If it's a rainy day or something, white really pops. In clear water or in mud, that's a great all-around one. And then in terms of like actually matching the trailer, I'm kind of surprised. A lot of these actually match pretty well. One of my favorite color combinations, what I do a lot is I use black blue, and then I'll put a green pumpkin or a green trailer on the back. And you see this one, this is a black, blue, purple with like a white trailer. I do like to do that a lot. If it's really clear water and awfully bright and stuff, a lot of times that's when I go with all natural, just all green and brown and stuff, really blend in. If it's more overcast, and especially in mud and stuff, I want contrasting colors. I want a mix of the white and the black blue, or I want the black blue and the green. I just think that the more options you see, the better the chance they get it. All right, so that's the jig. I made the case for the jig, but I told you a couple bonus tips I'd give you here is when it's time to switch and a few mistakes that people make. So let's start off with when to switch. And I think a couple things stand out to me, especially when I'm in heavy cover. If it's really thick grass and I'm having to get it not just on the top of the grass, but really feed it and get it down into the heart of it, or if it's like lay down trees and brush piles and stuff where those fish are, they're buried down in the middle of it. In that case, I'm going to get away from the jig and go to a Texas rig. To me, a Texas rig, it just gets through that cover easier. It snags less. It fishes more seamlessly. It gets to the bottom quicker because it's more streamlined, goes right through there. It's just less of a hassle. Now, the flip side is, they'll chase a lot of times when they've been pressured, they'll chase a swim jig really good. Late pre-spawn or something, when everybody's been throwing bladed jigs and square bills, that swim jig will work really well. But if they're really chomping it good and they're not kind of buried up in the cover, or even if they're in the grass clumps, but man, you're moving around pretty good, and they're biting that swim jig pretty aggressively, I'm going to pick up that bladed jig because, I don't know, the bladed jig, this is more my finesse one. If they're really chomping, that bladed jig catches big ones. I feel like I can power fish that a little bit more. I typically catch big ones on the bladed jig, and it has a little more calling power, I think. So if they're turned up, if they're really aggressive, I'm going to check out that bladed jig, like the slobber knocker, the chatterbait, and see if I can really start covering water and really put it to them, call them into it. if they kind of back off that, I'll back to the swim jig. If the fish have been pressured, this is a great, more pressured version. And then sometimes in the spring or fall when it's cold water and they're kind of nipping at the bait, they're not quite getting it, especially when you're swimming it, they're just coming up and kind of slapping at it a little bit and just kind of short striking, getting your tails and stuff. That's where a crankbait, square bill, if it's really shallow, use that Fritz side a lot, or maybe a medium diver if you're a little bit deeper on, say, transition banks, or you have grass that's 3-4 feet underneath the water. Those ones that are just nipping at at these, when they nip at the crankbait, well, it has treble hooks. So a lot of times in that cold water, you get one that's just barely caught, when he just kind of just gently comes up and nips at it. Well, you land those fish, whereas you just feel the thump and don't get them. So that's when I switch to the treble hook to crankbait. And then a couple of mistakes that I see, it's easier to cast and to pitch, and you can feel your bait, especially if it's windy or you're new to fishing, you can feel it really well with a heavier bait. And there's times, if you can get away with it, a heavier bait, if you're starting and you're not comfortable fishing in cover or something, going up to the half ounce, you're going to be able to feel it better. Now, especially around grass and stuff, the problem is that heavier bait, to me, a lot of times you're going to get less strikes if it starts to bog into the cover. It's going to get into the grass too much, start to bog down, and it's going to keep you from being able to trigger those fish. So in that case, I think going too heavy, just for the sake of, you don't necessarily need it for feel, but you just like that heavier one because it casts easier, or what you normally use. Lightening up, a lot of times it's going to come through the cover better, and it's going to just kind of feather over it instead of plowing into it. If they're ever in that feathering bite, that's when going lighter, going too heavy is kind of a mistake. And then another mistake, like we said, fast in clear water, a lot of times it's a trigger. When it's warm, a fast drop or something, that'll make fish bite. It'll trigger them. But when you're doing more of the swim retrieve, there's something about that Alabama shake, or just leaving it, with the swim jig style. When you leave it in front of them for a long time and you're just shaking it up there, it seems so easy to get. And you're just crawling over the cover and it just crawls through. Or even when you're plowing through the grass, you're just slow rolling it through there, and it kind of bogs up a little bit, and then boom, pops free, but then it goes slow again. Leaving it there for him to be an easy meal, especially with big fish, I think you're going to get more bites and bigger ones. Try to go a little bit slower on your retrieve, and you can hold your rod tip high. You can still keep it shallow up above the cover and not snag. But if you hold your rod tip high and you go slow, I think you're going to entice more bites than if you just have it and you're just ripping it through there and it just goes zipping by. And it's like, well, I was going to eat it, but it's already gone. And then when you're flipping it, this is the number one sin, and this is what gets them on jigs. And for me, experienced guys, when you haven't had a bite in a while, you start going through the motions and you pick up with your rod and you just kind of lift, drop, and going through the motions, and all of a sudden you lift up and, oh, there's grass in there. Oh, the grass just let go. You just felt something on it. And it's tough when you're around kind of springy wood, like branches or grass. A bite on a jig, what I always tell people is you're just weighing it every time. This is a 3/8 ounce jig. I'm picking it up. Oh, that feels like 3/8. And depending on the trailer, if you have a craw trailer, it's going to pull harder than something streamlined like this or a minnow bait. You're going to get used to the more you fish it. And that's another reason why with Simplify, I get to these same trailers and use them on a regular basis. Every time I pick up my rod, yeah, that feels about 3/8. Yep, that feels about 3/8. Ooh, that feels light. And it might not be like totally slack, or it might be like, not like, oh, it feels like a bowling ball. A lot of times like, oh, it feels just a little heavier. That feels weird. I can't feel my bait. It feels a little light. Those are bites. When you're getting a lot of bites, every time it feels a little weird, you're like, oh, bite, and you set the hook. When you've gone a long time without one, or you're kind of a novice, you don't know. And then you put a little pressure on it, and then thunk, you feel the hard thunk then, and that's him spitting it out because he felt it. So the whole key with jig fishing, when you're practicing, it's amazing. Until they feel the pressure, they'll swim around forever. So if you have a buddy by you and you don't want to see it, you can just feed them slack, and they'll swim around with that jig a long time before they spit it. As soon as you put pressure on, they feel that weed guard, they feel the hook, you feel them spit it out. So the key is be really slow on the pickup. Every time I take my rod and I lift up, I'm picking up, I want to come up really slowly. Force yourself to pick up slowly. And if you feel resistance, don't keep saying, that feels weird, and put more pressure. You're going to put enough pressure there until he spits it out. Hold it still. If it's a fish, he's going to move a little bit. Don't keep putting extra pressure. Just keep it there where it's got a tiny bit of pressure. You're going to feel something move. You're going to feel life there, something a little bit different. You can't feel it because he's coming towards you. They're putting slack in. Like I said, Cardinal sin on these is picking up too fast and putting too much pressure on, they spit it out. So remember with a jig, always pick it up slowly, be aware of how much that thing weighs, stay with that consistent trailer, and you're going to know how much it weighs, and you're going to have a lot better feel for the jig. If you keep on swapping out to different jig sizes, different trailers, different rods, different reels, different lines, all that stuff, it's hard to get that feel. All right, so that's jigs. You can see why they're part of my Simple 7. Has some other videos here that take you deeper dives into swim jigs and jigs, plus my whole playlist on the Simple 7 to help you simplify and catch more fish.